Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink, I have in sample form. It's by Noodlers. It's Violet. Which, actually my camera's turning it more blue. I shall fix that in post, but, yeah, this is... Honestly, I feel like people like have different opinions of what violet means. You know, how violet is different from purple. So to simplify it, it's a purple and it's a violet. So yeah, I generally think of violet as having more blue in it, and purple having a little bit more red in it. But yeah. So anyways. This was actually one of my last samples that I got from Goulet. It had to be probably about a year ago. Yeah, and it's a 2 milliliter sample, and I've still got a milliliter left. So, yeah. 2 pens I used were these. They're both Stubs, actually. This one's a MonteVerde Impressa with a 1.1 stub, which I'd say it's like just slightly wet, and it usually depends on the ink. Now this one is a Nemosine Singularity with a 0.6 stub, so it's practically half the size. But the thing is, when I did this test, it was before I adjusted it, because this used to be one of my really moderate pens. It was for when I really wanted to go easy on an ink or paper or whatever, because it was actually slightly dry. And in fact, it was infuriatingly dry, so I have altered it a bit since then, and you shall see in the test just how dry it was. Yeah, so I thought I'd try and find some inks I could compare this to. So here's Noodler's Violet, and here's Diatramentis Scented Black Currant, which you can see has a little bit more of that red in it. Here's KWZ Gray Plum, which is of course a bit darker, but I hope this comes through on camera, but there are these different areas that have more pink in them. And, I don't know, I thought it was not completely far off. Here's KWZ's Iron Gall Gummy Berry, which I feel like has a bit more of that blue in it. And then, just for comparison's sake, because I have brought up the difference between violet and purple, here's Noodler's Purple, which is a lot bolder and a lot brighter, in which my camera is really turning blue. This might be a problem. But yeah, so, fun. Alright, let's check out the chromatography. Here's the regular chromatography. And, as I hope you can see, there's this very distinct kind of pinkish purple down here. And then it sort of hazily goes up, and then it meets with this more bluish area, and then it's pretty, there's this tiny line of straight blue up at the top. Now here's where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it. But you can see the dot did get a bit darker, but actually this haze right through here is a lot thinner, which still remains kind of pink. And then this sort of line is less mucky, and then it's still a bit blue up at the top. Yeah. So I thought I'd see what this ink could hold up against. Denatured alcohol did absolutely nothing, so I've actually removed it from the test. Water really broke it up, as you can see, but all these tests kind of turn it pink. 1/3 bleach solution definitely turned it pink, but as you might be able to tell, a lot of it is still exactly where it was in the first place. Like, that was all part of the smear. Ammonia pen flush really broke it up and got it moving. And hydrogen peroxide, although it turned it pink, it definitely started to break it up a good bit more than the bleach did, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, on to the paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Yep. I hope this comes through. You definitely get some shading. You can particularly see it in the 1.1 stub, which is a little wetter. You can see it in the 0.6 as well. Speaking of the 0.6, it took 20 seconds to dry. And the 1.1 took 27, which was kind of long. I've just sort of come to expect sort of less than that, but also I feel like you can see here in the scrub for the 0.6, you see how that's kind of stop and starty? Yeah, it was having trouble. Oh no, that's the 1.1. Never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyways, there was some issue. Yeah, I don't know what was going on with this ink. It's very saturated, as you can tell from that smear. This is not an undersaturated ink. It does not ever look watery. There was no bleed, no feather, no spread. Really not any echo either. No sheen, at least not on here. Now, ignore these, what look like little footprints. That was from me cleaning up the ink. It did dye the page, but a lot of it is still there. Granted, for some reason, 0.6 broke up a good bit more, but the 1.1 is still pretty clear. Now, next up is Fabriano paper. Yeah. I love this stuff. It's 85 grams per square meter. It's not as steamroller smooth as Clairefontaine. It doesn't have a ceramic coating like Rhodia, but it tends to handle some of the more troublesome inks just a bit better. Now here we most definitely get shading. I hope this comes through on camera. Again, I don't know what was happening with the dry times. They're like 10 seconds apart. The 0.6 stub on here took 12 seconds, and the 1.1 took 16. Yeah, I don't know. But as you can probably tell, here, or maybe, I hope this comes up, here and there, you can sort of see it in the, yeah, I was having some hard starts with that 0.6. But yeah, no bleed, no feather, no spread. I wouldn't even say there's much echo in the scrubby. No sheen, but it's very well behaved, and what's interesting is this is actually very clear, this water test. It turned what is essentially a pink, but it's pretty clear and it's pretty there. And though it did dye the page a little bit, if you had to recover that, I absolutely think you could. Now, next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. I started testing on this and something just didn't feel right, and by the time I got to the water test, I was like, yep. This was from approaching the bottom of the block, and you know, someday I'll give a lecture on paper, but not today. So I decided to retest on this tiny little piece of Rhodia, and I got results much more like you would expect. Now, the 0.6 stub was 16 seconds, the 1.1 was 19. You do get some very lovely shading through here. This is a very rich color. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. All very well behaved in that regard. Water test. Once again, although it turned fairly pinkish, it's pretty clear. The top of that T is gone, but that's pretty much it. Everything else, pretty readable. If you had to recover that, I absolutely think you could. Next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out dry times and shading and sheen. And there is a tiny bit of sheen, and I doubt I'm going to get it on camera, but it's like around this little bit of the scrubby. Come on. Anyways, it's actually kind of a coppery color. It's sort of like a red, orange, gold kind of thing, which is a very lovely contrast to this color of purple. But anyways, as you can probably tell from the scrubby, you do get some shading. It's very saturated. I mean, look at that smear test. But yeah, the 0.6 stub took 19 seconds to dry. The 1.1 took 23, so it was kind of drawing out those dry times a little bit. But the thing is, everything that looked like sheen was taking forever to dry. And so at the start of each of these lines, when I would like put down the pen to like write that and put that down to write this, when I'd pick it up again, there'd be this little bit of sheen. And as I was sort of scooting the page up to continue writing, it kept smearing. And it just made me incredibly infuriated. And the thing is, even after it dried, it would smear. When I was done with all the tests, and they were done drying after the water test, and I was bundling them up to put in my box of finished tests, it still smeared. It still smeared. So that must have been 20, 30 minutes. Everything that looked like sheen just never seemed to dry. Oh, okay, now after like a month it doesn't smear, but whatever. Anyways, that was really frustrating. The dots especially never dried, but you know, whatever. And this is a fairly dark ink, and this is quite thin paper. So if echo or show through is something you're sensitive to, in fact the camera's not showing this as clearly as I can see it in person, but if you're sensitive to it, it's something to be aware of, especially if you're someone who compulsively has to write on both sides of the page. But This paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water, but that's not really what happened here, which kind of surprised me. You can see that pretty clearly. That's pretty there. So, yeah, if you had to recover that, I think you could. Now for these next 3 tests, I only used the 0.6 stub, except to write the name. So, first up is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper, which really is exactly that. This is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper, so chances are your results will be at least a little bit better than this. Now, here you get a very distinct purple/violet, depending on your definition, color. It is a bit lighter, I think, because it loses that shading. It sort of brightens it up a little bit. It took 2.5 seconds to dry. It does not start to look thin or undersaturated on here. There is spread. I mean, if you look at the line with here versus here, it essentially starts to look exactly the same as the 1.1. So, yeah, it's pretty intense. And it's very woolly. You get feathering. You know, it's not ideal. And again, that 0.6 stub was so dry that it was actually driving me crazy. And yet we still get this. And that's with a bright light coming in this direction. So, yeah. I mean, again, as you can probably tell, these dots still are pretty hazy, which means it didn't fully get through, didn't get to the other page below, but still something to be aware of. But again, pretty much everyone has paper better than this. But yeah, water test, it did kind of feather, it did kind of explode, did dye the page, but it's still pretty dark, so depending on how motivated you are to recover that, you might be able to. Now next up is Mead Notebook Paper, which is cheap, like most American school students have it, they sell it in pharmacies. It's physically thinner than 20-pound copier paper, and it tends to outperform it, which it kind of did here. Now, took 2 seconds to dry, and I was having some startup issues because these are very absorbent papers, and this isn't an extremely wet flowing ink, and that's a pretty dry pen in the first place. So there were some problems. I would have to prime the feed, something to be aware of. But we don't really get feathering. We do get a wooliness, but we don't really get feathering, which is kind of nice. And the spread is not nearly as bad, so there's that. But because this is a fairly dark ink and this is quite thin and very cheap as an inexpensive and produced paper, we do get some show-through. But as I feel you can see, do you see how hazy this is? This is mostly show-through. It's not as bad as the 20-pound copier paper where you get these very distinct dots all the way through. So, yeah, maybe not ideal for writing on both sides, but what you get on the one side will be better than 20-pound copier paper. Now this paper does hate water, so when you add it, it does tend to feather and explode. That would be the opposite of fun to try and recover. Now lastly is Moleskine notebook paper. I was running out of accurate Moleskine paper, so I just butchered a tiny volant, so tiny page. But yeah, I didn't even use the 1.1 stub, and it was pretty bad. Do you see how woolly this is? It took 3 seconds to dry. There is utterly no shading. There is this really hideous feathering all through here. It's nasty. And then, look at that. And all of this is with a very dry writing, very small stub, and that's with a light coming in this direction. It's not coming through the back. That's nasty. Yeah. Water test. This paper hates water, and it hates ink, so ink plus water equals disaster. I mean, look, the feathering and exploding actually starts to overlap, and that's teeny tiny writing. I mean, that's less than 0.5 millimeters, so that's, if you're one of those people with microphagia, that's just a disaster waiting to happen right there. That pen and ink combo and paper. So, there you go. There's Noodler's Violet. I don't know. Apparently I don't know the difference between purple and violet because I was always under the impression that violet had more blue to it. This is more what I think of as purple. It's a very lovely purple. It's not an aggressive ink. It is very saturated. It is not terribly wet. Yeah, it looks good on premium papers. Maybe be cautious. on cheap papers, but I feel like that's a warning for any cheap paper. But yeah, anyways, for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.